Right now, the Ukrainian Armed Forces are driving the Russians out of Donbas. The fiery trap is closed, the enemy is in panic. Donetsk region is turning into a real hell for the occupiers. A complete sweep. Russian troops are fleeing their positions one after another. This is a real turning point on the front. Ukrainian fighters have broken a crack in the enemy's defenses. The Russian positions are simply reduced to ashes. These shots are blowing up the internet. An apocalypse for the Kremlin. Trump shocks the world. Top secret intelligence is already in the hands of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Miracle missiles and deadly drones are heading for Russia. Putin screamed when he heard, "Urgent!" Disaster has erupted in the USA. The White House is paralyzed. Officials are resigning en masse. This looks like the end for Trump. The fate of the USA is being decided right now. Europe is on the verge of exploding. Russia is threatening not only Ukraine. Another country is in the crosshairs. Disaster is approaching. The countdown has begun. All this and more coming up in our show Hotspot. Urgent! The Ukrainian Armed Forces are driving the Russians out of Donbas. The fiery trap is snapping shut, a complete sweep. This is a triumph. The Ukrainian Armed Forces have hit the jackpot. Russian troops are retreating in panic. The enemy is losing positions one after another. How are Ukrainian fighters turning Donetsk region into a nightmare for Russia? All the sensational details coming up.
Only 1 out of 10 Russian assault troops reaches Ukrainian positions in the area of Novopavlivka and Dobropilia in Donetsk region. This is reported by the Institute for the Study of War. Russian forces continue offensive operations in this direction, trying to break through to Pokrovsk before the winter cold sets in.
A representative of the Ukrainian brigade operating in the Pokrovsk direction reported that Russian infantry continues to attack in small assault groups once or twice a day. The increased range of Russian strike drones expands the area of impact and complicates Ukrainian logistics. The representative noted that Russian forces in this direction are also experiencing logistical problems, and that Russian troops have to deliver supplies on foot in small groups to avoid detection by Ukrainian drones.
In the Pokrovsk and Dobropilia directions, the occupier continues to actively assault Ukrainian positions using infiltration tactics.
These are not entrenched enemy forces. These are small groups of 3 to 5 people who have infiltrated our territory during assaults, and they need to be cleared out. This is, so to speak, territory where they haven't established themselves, and at this stage it can also be cleared by us.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has long been aware of this tactic and is successfully countering it. Out of 155 battles in a day, 51 were recorded specifically in the Pokrovsk direction.
It should be noted that at present the enemy is actively trying to use the tactic of infiltrating small groups into the rear areas of our troops, with the aim of further building up forces and developing an offensive in our rear. Andriy Hanatov, Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
And here is the action of the Ukrainian Burevy Brigade in the Kupiansk direction. About 100 Russian soldiers were neutralized, dozens of drones were destroyed, more than 30 shelters were demolished. Radio equipment was disabled, and a heavy flamethrower system TOS-1A, Solntsepiok, was destroyed. In the Kharkiv region, Ukrainian drones are actively hindering Russian attacks, which has forced Russian troops to avoid mechanized assaults since August 2025 and to advance mostly on foot, a tactic that the Ukrainian armed forces are successfully exploiting. This is a video of the elimination of a Russian soldier in the same direction. The occupier is forced to fend off the Ukrainian drone with a log, but it's all in vain. In the Sumy direction, Ukrainian special forces managed to clear out positions that the Russian army had held for a long time. At the site, they found the phone of the eliminated enemy Nikolai Prusov, who complained about the lack of supplies and rotations.
They just took the whole can of condensed milk. It's just about cutting open the condensed milk. That's how much you want to eat here.
Meanwhile, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, according to the publication Hip State, the Russians have advanced in Verbov and Beresove. There have also been successes in the area of Novoivanivka in the Zaporizhzhia region. This was also reported by Russian public channels. They write that during the fighting, the occupiers took control of more than 10 square kilometers of territory. But considering that in the past few days, the Ukrainian armed forces have liberated almost 20 times more territory, this temporary success won't last long.
Apocalypse from Moscow. Trump has turned the game upside down. The order is already on the table. This will wipe out the Kremlin. The US will hand over top-secret intelligence data. A fiery whirlwind is already heading toward Russia. Shock! Ukrainian miracle missiles ready to launch. Putin is losing control. Deadly strikes. This is tearing the network apart. Watch.
U.S. President Donald Trump has approved the transfer of intelligence to Ukraine for targeting airstrikes on energy infrastructure deep inside Russia, sources told the Wall Street Journal, which was later confirmed by Reuters' sources. Journalists report that the transfer of intelligence is not just for long-range airstrikes but also for missile strikes. The article suggests that the next step for the Trump administration could be agreeing to provide Kyiv with more powerful weapons, which would allow them to hit more targets inside Russia.
The Trump administration has officially announced a significant transfer of approximately 3,300 crucial RAM units to the Ukrainian side, a move that has garnered considerable attention. The technical specifications are over 450 kilometers. Let me remind you that during the entire term of the Biden administration, the Ukrainian Defense Forces received no more than 100 Attack-A-Miss units. Their technical specifications are about 300 kilometers.
The blackout at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant lasted more than 3 hours. The strike by Russian forces on the energy facility in Slavutych, which left the Chernobyl nuclear power plant without electricity, was deliberate. This was reported by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky.
It should be noted that strikes are being carried out not only on the power systems supplying the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, but also, accordingly, Russian drones have been spotted over the South Ukraine nuclear power plant. Moreover, the Russian Federation periodically creates preconditions for a man-made disaster at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The actions that are currently taking place in the Chernihiv direction are what is called the thousand cuts tactic, meaning the creation of the effect of possible intensification of hostilities in this area in order to divert the operational reserves of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine from the main direction of the Russian occupying forces' attack.
The specifications of the Ukrainian cruise missile known as the Long Neptune have become known. In particular, the exact range of the missile and the weight of its warhead have been disclosed, according to experts from Defense Express.
The Ukrainian side has already stated that strikes on the thermal power plant in Belgorod were carried out using the Neptune missile. It should be noted that the Ukrainian version completely refutes the Russian reports claiming that the strikes were allegedly carried out using American weapons. In addition, it is worth highlighting the successful use of the Neptune missile during the strike on legitimate military targets in the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea.
The test and successful combat use of the R-360 Neptune missile, as the weapon is officially called, took place in March 2025. A Dutch F-35 fighter jet shot down a Russian Shahed drone. This is evidenced by a marking left on the aircraft.
Using the F-35 to neutralize Gerbera unmanned aerial vehicles, which cost $10,000, is economically impractical. An hour of flight time for the F-35 is about $40,000. And in addition, of course, there are the munitions used by the F-35. And the cost of a missile is about $1.5 million.
Journalists suggest that most likely the drone was shot down in Polish airspace during the attack on September 10th. The Ukrainian Defense Forces have cut through the so-called Dobropilya salient of the Russian Federation and are doing everything possible to inflict maximum losses on the Russian occupiers, wrote Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky.
Over the past day, the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the Dobropilya direction have advanced from 100 to 1,500 meters. These are significant tactical successes by our defenders. In addition, I would like to note that during the counteroffensive operation, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have deoccupied about 170 square kilometers and cleared about 190 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory from saboteurs.
French special forces detained a Russian tanker from the Shadow Fleet off the coast of France, which was circumventing sanctions to sell oil. However, sanctions were not the only thing the sailors were guilty of. The vessel was allegedly linked to recent drone flights over Denmark, according to the Telegraph. Denmark called the attack extremely serious, and it was directed at critical infrastructure since air traffic was disrupted and the Danes were even forced to close Copenhagen airport. Russia, for its part, as usual, denies any involvement.
Breaking news. Shutdown in the USA. The White House is paralyzed. Officials are going on leave en masse. Military aid for Ukraine is on hold. Key weapons deliveries are under threat. Intelligence data may not arrive on time. Trump's political games and chaos in Congress are creating a domino effect that could upend the entire strategy of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and change the course of the war. See all the details of the shocking consequences.
The first shutdown in 7 years, the US government has partially shut down. About 750,000 federal employees will be furloughed for an indefinite period or will have to work without pay. Each day the government is shut down will cost America approximately $400 million. The whole mess is due to budget conflicts between Republicans and Democrats. They couldn't reach an agreement on how to allocate the federal budget, particularly regarding taxation and healthcare. Simply put, the Democrats demanded an extension of medical benefits for 24 million Americans, as well as increased subsidies for the sector. The Republicans saw these demands as pandering to voters and refused to make any concessions. The cherry on top of these already complicated negotiations was this video. After an unproductive meeting with the Democrats, the president of the superpower posted this on his social media.
If we were to provide all of these undocumented immigrants with comprehensive free healthcare services, we might indeed be able to effectively win them over to our side. And consequently, they could potentially cast their votes for us.
In this video, created with the help of artificial intelligence, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, appears wearing a sombrero and a mustache. And the fake voice is supposedly that of Senator Chuck Schumer. Trump was accused of racism, and his party, although it controls both chambers of Congress, did not have enough votes to pass the spending bill and failed to gain support from the Democrats. As a result, the Senate rejected the short-term funding bill that would have kept the government running.
The Senate session is adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
While members of the parties point fingers at each other, journalists are clarifying how the shutdown will affect the lives of ordinary Americans and visitors to the country. For example, the U.S. Department of Transportation has already announced that more than 11,000 Federal Aviation Administration employees will be placed on forced leave, while over 13,000 air traffic controllers will have to work without pay. And that's despite the fact that the industry is already short about 4,000 of these employees. This means that air travel will slow down.
The U.S. Travel Association, which represents airlines, hotels, car rental companies, and other tourism businesses, has stated that a partial shutdown of the federal government will cost the country's tourism sector about $1 billion per week.
This is already the 15th government shutdown since 1981. The longest in U.S. history lasted 35 days, from December 2018 to January 2019, during Trump's first term. At that time, Republicans and Democrats argued over funding for the construction of a wall on the border with Mexico. And even though politicians paint a bleak future, political scientists believe they're exaggerating.
These financial shutdowns seem to be on the edge. But a wealthy country like the United States can't really be on the edge, given its leadership, economic, political, and military conditions. It's a kind of theater that lawmakers constantly stage together with the president. In short, it may seem like everything is tough, but in the end, let me tell you a secret, there's a happy ending. They'll allow a few more $1 trillion to be printed and everyone will be happy. That's why right now, when it comes to money in the US, we approach very quietly or even take a pause altogether, because talking about money will just make them angry. We definitely need to hold off for a week, let them negotiate.
It's global and it's painful. According to analysts, the shutdown overseas won't have a major impact on Ukraine or its ability to resist Russian aggression. In particular, this is because after Donald Trump took office in the Oval Office, he shifted the financial burden in this area onto the Europeans. And the expenses for supporting the Ukrainian army that the US does have are all part of long-standing agreements for the fiscal year that's about to end.
Urgent and terrifying news is coming from the US. This will hit Ukraine. Every week, $15 billion down the drain. The White House is laying off hundreds of employees. Military aid to Ukraine is hanging by a thread. The world is on the edge of an abyss. Trump has scheduled a meeting with Xi Jinping. What will the leaders really talk about, and how could it change everything? Stay tuned.
The US government has shut down. Shut down. This term is on everyone's lips around the world. Simply put, the government stopped working because they couldn't agree on the budget, and immediately the whole country is in chaos.
The Democrats must stop sabotaging our country and taking Americans hostage. The Democrats need to do their job. Americans want the government to start working again.
For the first time in almost 7 years, and for the third time during Donald Trump's presidency, Republicans and Democrats failed to reach an agreement on budget spending by October 1st.
The Democrats want a shutdown, so when it happens, we have to make cuts. As a result, we will lay off a lot of people who will be seriously affected.
At the same time, Democrats are being conveniently blamed for the shutdown.
Today, Donald Trump is indeed using, in many significant ways, his classic aggressive rhetoric toward the Democrats, and is squarely blaming them for the ongoing government shutdown. Overall, the situation is predictable, fairly controlled, and once again, for America and its political culture, this process is quite traditional.
Only the departments responsible for people's safety and the protection of property continue to operate. All the others are sent on unpaid leave. But the longer the shutdown lasts, the more money the US loses. That's about $15 billion of the country's GDP per week.
Of course, everything won't be perfect because we're in a shutdown situation. If the shutdown continues, we'll have to lay off some employees. We truly don't like it. We certainly don't want it. But we will absolutely do whatever is necessary to ensure that essential services for the American people keep functioning properly and effectively.
Trump himself isn't too concerned about the government shutdown, since he thinks the Democrats are crazy. But this isn't Trump's first shutdown. So how will this affect his reputation, which he cares about so much?
There are already more than enough reasons for Trump's approval rating to drop. If we look back at history, there have already been government shutdowns under Trump, and in fact, he presided over the longest one in history. It lasted a full 35 days. In principle, Trump came out of it with a fairly high approval rating. This is the phenomenon of this politician. Even when negativity sticks to him, it doesn't really affect the support he gets from his core electorate.
A shutdown can last from several days to 2 weeks, which is critically long for Ukraine, since it could slow down the delivery of weapons and aid to the country.
I think the story with the shutdown is more of a political projection that has direct consequences for domestic American politics. As for foreign policy, as for, say, making decisions about, for example, selling weapons to Ukraine with European funds, and in general, the broader dialogue on finding a common strategy to counter Russia and China, Trump and his cabinet will be ready to work actively, and in no way should the shutdown have a significant impact on these processes.
Trump has announced the timing of a meeting with Xi, and it could happen as soon as a month from now. Will they be addressing important political issues? No, of course not. The main topic of discussion will be soybeans and other crops that China is refusing to purchase.
Indeed, the meeting is overdue, it is important, but it seems that the White House is more interested in it than the Chinese administration. Therefore, the implementation and even the potential meeting itself are currently in quite a precarious state.
But now it seems Russia risks freezing. It is reported that Ukraine has received an important authorization. Trump has given the green light to American intelligence to share intelligence data for strikes on Russian energy infrastructure.
It can be assumed that Ukraine will receive some additional information, extra targets, and coordinates. This would really help us because Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil refineries are currently the most effective sanctions that have been imposed on the Russian Federation since the start of the full-scale invasion.
But whether Trump will transfer Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, which the president of Ukraine discussed in person with the US president, remains an open question, just as it does for other long-range missiles.
Last time we had a truly very productive, very fruitful dialogue. We talked about long-range weapon systems. We'll see. Everything will depend on his decision. It's important.
Meanwhile, the president of Ukraine is already in Denmark. There, he will attend the European Political Community Summit, where the focus will be on the recent violation of European countries' airspace.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Urgent. Europe is on the brink of an explosion. This is an invasion. The Kremlin is crossing the line, Tapa. Now, not only Ukraine is in the crosshairs, but also Poland and all of Europe. The countdown has begun. The disaster scenario has already been calculated, and the consequences could be irreversible. What is Moscow plotting, and why could this become the beginning of the end for the entire continent? Watch right now.
The Kremlin is expanding the geography of the war. Europe and NATO are preparing for a possible invasion by the Russian dictator.
It needs to be done subtly, carefully, but it absolutely must be done.
Drones are increasingly violating the airspace of European countries. Such incidents have been recorded in Denmark, Norway, Romania, and Poland. In this way, the Kremlin is increasing pressure on Europe through hybrid attacks and preparations for a large-scale conflict. Poland remains the primary country at risk. The strike on September 10th is a deliberate, carefully planned Russian strategy.
Poland is currently one of the priorities for the Russian Federation. One of them, not the only one, but one of them. Why? Because it is precisely through Polish territory that a huge amount of military cargo is transported toward Ukraine and the Ukrainian fronts. And in Russia, they are well aware that if this route is closed, if this route is cut off, then Ukraine's logistics are disrupted, in other words, severed, and would need to be rebuilt. And at that point, it would be possible to actually achieve some territorial gains.
And furthermore, in the event of an invasion of Poland, Russia could prepare a force of 100,000 to 150,000 troops to implement the Suwałki corridor scenario.
At the moment, up to 40,000 Polish troops are being moved directly to the border with the Republic of Belarus from Lacera. Similar actions are being carried out by the Polish military on the territory of the Baltic states as well. In addition, at the moment, the naval component of joint NATO exercises is taking place in the Baltic Sea.
There are also increasing reports that Russia might attack the Baltic states. Since the start of the major war in Ukraine, Russian forces have increased the number of provocations in the Baltic region.
Currently, it is clear that the Russian Federation does not have the forces for a full-scale invasion, as was done in Ukraine, although our military notes that over the past 8 months, there has indeed been a gradual decrease in the amount of Russian equipment destroyed on the front lines each month. In other words, the graphs have been going lower and lower since January, February, specifically for 3 types of weaponry: anti-radiation defense systems, tanks, and IFVs. There is a lot of room for speculation here. Why? Either they have started producing fewer tanks and IFVs, or they are producing them but hiding them somewhere for some other purposes.
Another pretext to start a war is the Estonian city of Narva. It is located in the east of the country. A small river separates it from Russia. Already today, in the narratives of Kremlin propaganda, Narva is portrayed as a city where Russians are actively oppressed by Estonians.
These are roughly 200 to 300 of Gherkin's riflemen who could infiltrate a populated area, say Narva, and carry out the same scenario as they did in Crimea and Donetsk. They seize the post office, the telephone exchange, the telegraph, the mayor's office, and declare the creation of some kind of People's Republic, then ask Putin to send in troops. This scenario is actually quite realistic.
Only in Russia, everyone is shouting from all sides that they supposedly don't want a war with Europe and NATO. Alka, former President Medvedev, insists that Russia has supposedly always come to Europe as a liberator, not as an invader. And Putin's loyal henchwoman Maria Zakharova has started accusing Ukraine of preparing an anti-Russian provocation. Supposedly, Russian drones are being used in Poland and Romania to push NATO into a war against Russia.
This message came from the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation. I saw it yesterday. It was a very funny message. Let me explain why it's funny. The Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation is a paper tiger. Actually, it's not even a paper tiger, it's more like a paper teddy bear. This organization isn't respected even within the Russian security hierarchy. They're not respected, not feared, and not seen as an authority even by ordinary local police officers. And so all that's left for this service to come up with, to generate some random ideas, random conspiracies, just to show that their work is important.
In response to threats from Russia, NATO and EU countries are urgently strengthening their defenses, building a wall of drones, and discussing providing Ukraine with air defense systems to create a shield. After Russia violated Polish airspace, NATO launched Operation Eastern Shield. Denmark has also called up several hundred reservists for service. The soldiers have been ordered to report as soon as possible.
At the moment, air units are being redeployed to the territory of Poland and Romania. These are NATO's flanks. In addition, combined NATO units are being redeployed to the Baltic states. Naval exercises are being conducted in the Baltic Sea area. It should be noted that the newest United States aircraft carrier is currently in Danish waters, and this is a serious signal to the Russian Federation. In addition, French Rafale jets have been deployed to Poland, and these are capable of carrying nuclear weapons.
In fact, Russia began threatening NATO as far back as 10 years ago. At that time, Turkey, led by Erdogan, was in the crosshairs. Back in 2015, a Russian bomber violated the country's airspace. According to Turkish authorities, before it was shot down by a Turkish F-16 fighter jet, the Russian plane did not respond to warnings. Now, Putin's strategic goal is the collapse of the collective West and the undermining of trust among NATO members.
Shock. The West is feeding the war itself. Analysts are sounding the alarm. Despite the barrage of Ukrainian drone attacks, the Russian oil machine is still running. And it doesn't rely on the Kremlin's resilience at all, but rather on European purchases. The amounts that just 4 European countries have already invested in a war against themselves are simply staggering. You'll be shocked when you hear it. These figures will completely change your understanding of who is really keeping Putin's regime afloat. Watch this.
They condemn the war but keep paying for it. 4 EU countries have paid Russia more money for gas than they've given in aid to Ukraine. Billions of euros that could have saved lives are being turned into weapons that kill Ukrainians. According to the Belgian branch of Greenpeace, from the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022 to June 2025, France, Belgium, Spain and the Netherlands paid Russia 34.3 billion euros for gas supplies. During the same period, the combined aid from these 4 countries to Ukraine amounted to 21.2 billion euros.
Such trade continues to bring billions from Europe into Russia. It is carried out by energy companies whose main offices are located in Europe, including Total Energy, Shell, Naturgy and Safe. They provide and continue to supply gas from Russia to Europe for the coming years. This is stated in the Greenpeace study.
The supply scheme has long since changed. It's not just about direct purchases of pipeline gas. The lion's share of contracts is for liquefied natural gas, which Europe receives through terminals in the Netherlands, Belgium and Spain. These countries have become the key transit gateways for Russian fuel. And although European leaders loudly declare that they are reducing their dependence on Moscow, the facts say otherwise. In total, 8 EU countries are currently importing Russian gas. France, Belgium, Spain, the Netherlands, Hungary, Slovakia, Greece and Portugal. The main beneficiary of these supplies is the Yamal LNG project. Just in 2022 to 2024, its revenue from exports to Europe amounted to about $40 billion. Of that, at least $9.5 billion went into the budget of the aggressor country. Analysts have calculated that this amount would be enough for Russia to produce almost 10 million artillery shells, or more than 270,000 Shahed attack drones, or about 2,700 T-90M tanks.
It's just business, nothing personal. Europe, as it has been all this time for the past 100 years, remains the same. It's all just about their own interests, their own. That's all they care about and so on. They don't need anything else. After all, the price Russia offers for LNG is at least 15% lower than global prices. They count their money first and foremost. And that's why everyone tries to profit from this war. And Ukraine will be the first to suffer. Unfortunately, the Europeans did not become our full-fledged partners. In words, they are partners. But in reality, the ones actually helping us are those countries that could potentially suffer significantly from the adverse actions of the Russian Federation.
It was only in July that Brussels decided to take a new step. Starting from January 2027, the EU will ban the import of Russian liquefied gas, as well as transactions with Rosneft and Gazprom Neft. But critics are convinced this step comes too late. A step taken only after pressure from the US and personally from Donald Trump, who directly accused Europe of financing Russia's war against Ukraine.
To be honest, I don't believe in a 100% rejection of energy resources, that Europe will completely give up Russian energy. That's one. Secondly, the model could simply change. What I mean to convey is if at this present moment in time, the continent of Europe is actively engaged in the process of acquiring vital energy resources directly from the Russian Federation, then, as we can clearly observe, a particular kind of complex and evolving situation is beginning to unfold. A sort of, a significant border circle is clearly forming around Europe in which, in fact, the Americans are steadily taking complete control of the crucial gas sector. This specifically includes the Nord Stream pipelines, as well as Bulgaria. They plan to take control of the gas storage facilities there in 2026. In the same gas flows, because it may very well happen that in the year 2027 or even 28, they will not directly purchase from Russia, but instead will acquire from Russian companies.
Europe understands well that replacing Russian gas with American gas could have a significant impact on its budget in the future.
And they are resisting this, understanding that by becoming completely dependent, in a monopoly dependence on the United States of America, they could eventually also end up with unreasonable prices for gas or anything else.
Alongside gas, Russia is actively exporting oil and doing so despite the sanctions. To circumvent the restrictions, the Kremlin uses the so-called shadow fleet. The West prohibits buying Russian oil at prices above $60 per barrel and using the services of major insurance companies. Russian tankers operating with the shadow fleet are forced either to insure themselves in Russia or to go without insurance. Most often, these ships sail under the flags of countries that do not comply with international regulations. And the tanker owners are often shell companies that frequently change their identities and operations. According to the reputable Russian Price Index Center, in the final weeks of August, Russia's significant maritime oil exports demonstrably increased by a substantial 21%. According to the Price Index Center, in the last weeks of August, these exports saw a notable rise, up to 455,000 tons per day. This is the highest summer figure, although it is still less than in August 2024. At the same time, 52% of the oil is sent to unknown destinations. 28% goes to China, 14% to Turkey. And about 80% of the shipments end up in India.
We need to look at the oil market a bit more broadly because substitution, the significant replacement of Russian oil in Europe happened primarily because Indian gasoline and diesel fuel flooded into the European Union from India. But it's also important to note that Russian fuel is still being processed and utilized in various ways. In other words, the supply chain has become longer. And in this model, India says, I'm ready to give up Russian oil, but then let me buy it either from Iran or from Venezuela. Because there aren't that many free oil production capacities in the world right now. And that's why, in this model, a certain oil corridor is being formed, or rather expanded. Well, how willing the United States will be to give the green light to increasing the production or sale of Iranian or Venezuelan oil on the market is still an open question.
And while some are looking for ways to save money by buying from a terrorist country, every barrel of Russian gas and oil is turned into shells, tanks, and drones that kill people. In this system, every delivery leaves a trace. Ukraine, as a result, pays for this energy luxury with the highest price, the lives of its citizens and its destroyed cities.
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front lines, stay tuned for our next episode.